So when a brand new nation is born, it faces this enormous challenge, right? For India in 1950, with the adoption of its constitution, we're talking about creating a blueprint for a country of hundreds of millions. And they had to start with the most basic questions you could possibly imagine. I mean, think about it. How do you build a nation? It's a massive question. Where do you even begin? Imagine someone just hands you the keys to a new country. What are the very first things you absolutely have to figure out?
Well, it turns out it all boils down to two questions that are surprisingly simple but also incredibly profound. First, you have to define your physical space, and then you have to define the people who actually belong in that space.
Where are we and who are we? These are the two foundational questions that the very first parts of India's constitution set out to answer. So, in this explainer, we're going to dive in and see exactly how they did it.
All right, first up, Part 1 of the Constitution. This part tackles that first question, where are we? It's all about drawing the map, defining the physical boundaries of this new nation.
Now, what's so fascinating is how Article 1 defines India. It calls it a union of states. And this concept is really powerful. Think of it like this. India, the country, is one big, permanent building that cannot be broken apart. But the internal walls, the states themselves, they can be moved, resized, or even removed. The union is indestructible, but the states are not.
And the power to do all that rearranging is just immense. Article 3 gives Parliament the authority to literally redraw the internal map of India. It can create whole new states, shrink existing ones, change their names, change their borders. It's a huge, huge power to shape the nation's geography.
Okay, so after defining the land, the Constitution had to define the people. And this question, who are we? This was way more complex, especially coming right after the partition of India.
Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the rules, we need to understand one really key legal concept: domicile. This isn't just about where you live, it's the country you think of as your permanent home, the place you have a real substantial connection to. This idea is the absolute bedrock of the first rule of citizenship.
So Article 5 laid out a pretty simple framework. First, you had to have your domicile, your permanent home in India. Check. And then, you only had to meet one of these other three conditions. You were born there, or one of your parents was born there, or you'd been living there for at least 5 years. Simple enough, right? For most people, this worked, but it just couldn't account for the chaos of partition.
Yeah, history demanded exceptions. The partition of India in 1947 created one of the largest mass migrations in all of human history. We're talking millions of people crossing newly created borders. That simple rule of domicile, it just wasn't going to be enough to handle a situation this massive and this unprecedented.
So the Constitution needed a special set of rules. It created two key articles to manage this two-way flow of people. You have Article 6, which deals with people who move from Pakistan to India, and then you have Article 7, which addresses those who went the other way, from India to Pakistan.
Okay, for those coming to India, Article 6 essentially drew a line in the sand. That date, July 19, 1948, was when a formal permit system for migration was set up. If you came to India before that date, becoming a citizen was fairly straightforward. But if you came on or after that date, you had to live in India for at least 6 months and then formally apply to be registered as a citizen. It became a much more structured process.
Now, for the people who left India for Pakistan, Article 7 was pretty blunt. If you migrated after March 1st, 1947, you were no longer an Indian citizen. Period. But, and this is a big but, there was a critical exception. If you later came back to India with an official permit to resettle permanently, you could get back on the path to citizenship, but you'd have to follow those stricter rules we just saw in Article 6.
And finally, you have Article 9, which made one thing crystal clear, and it's a principle that holds true to this day. India does not do dual citizenship. If you voluntarily become a citizen of another country, you automatically, instantly, are no longer a citizen of India. It's that simple.
So the Constitution answered those initial giant questions of where are we and who are we. But the framers were incredibly wise. They knew that these answers, which were created for a very specific, very turbulent moment in 1950, well, they knew they weren't the final word on the matter.
They actually built in flexibility for the future. Article 10 basically said that anyone who is a citizen at the very beginning would stay one. But, and this is key, that status was always subject to any future laws that Parliament might make. They were essentially saying, look, these are the rules for now, but things might change, and we need to be ready for that.
And Article 11 just drives this point home.
It explicitly gives Parliament complete and total authority to make any future laws about who can become a citizen, who can lose citizenship, and literally everything in between. This wasn't a closed chapter, it was the opening sentence of a much longer story.
Which, of course, leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to think about. If these articles were just the foundation laid way back in 1950, what's the real story of what has been built on top of that foundation over the last 70-plus years as the very idea of who belongs to the nation continues to evolve?